This morning, as we talk again, once more, at least a little bit about timelines. I've told you before how important I feel they are, and there are many other people that also feel that they are very important, but timelines also need to be linked with place. And one of the first things that I hope you do is, as you make a timeline for yourself, as you make a timeline for your family, that you always, always, always include place with each and every entry that you make on your timeline. It's so important. Remember, you're not only making this so that you can take a look at your materials and see where you haven't looked yet for proof of materials, but you're also putting together a timeline so that someone else can begin to follow it. What is really apparent to you on its face is not apparent to a niece or a nephew or someone later on. So when you make a timeline, you want to do it with the idea that you're making it not only for yourself as an immediate way to analyze. It's a tool. It's a great analysis tool. But you also want to do it so that they can follow how you analyze something and what you did. When you get done with the timeline, I had someone a few years ago who did a timeline who had really put lots of neat things on the side, just handwritten, of course. But then when they put out the timeline, they said, oh no, I've got to put out a really nice one for my family. Oh, shucks. The family members didn't get all the commentaries or the ways in which that person had looked for materials, had only found a little bit of material, had not gone back to look to see where and when a county was formed. And those are all valuable hints. Additionally, they give your family great context about you as a researcher. It's really a valuable thing to do. So today we're going to look at several things. I've given you 3 handouts that you can choose to use. At least one of them, well, 2 of them actually have, all 3 of them maybe probably have some color in them. I'm going to go to the share screen and pull up the first one that actually has a bonus for you in it. One of the things that I've looked at earlier this summer, then came across it again. I was just showing Linda this cheat sheet of historical maps from Family Tree magazine. Topographical maps are really helpful when you compose a timeline. I never thought that there would really be a decent map of the little area of Ferndale right outside of Big Fork, Montana. There's one, and there's not only that, it's historic in reference time. And it does begin to show, first of all, Missoula County. So that was interesting to me. But remember that when you're using any kind of map in conjunction with your timeline, you want to record what you found, where you found it, and how the land may have affected settlement. In Ferndale, it's very apparent that all the little plots of land were made strictly for people to do just really basic farming on plots usually of 20 acres or less. So they weren't going to make any money off of their land. And there was a lot of land that had to be cleaned. And guess what? As soon as you cleaned it, the reason the place is named Ferndale is because those ferns came back. They grew a great deal. So when and if you see my total timeline on my several families in Ferndale, note what I've said about Ferndale. I know that in a July 4th celebration, they loaded all the kids from Ferndale into the back of a truck. Gives me the willies when I think about it. And we rumbled down that old road in the canyon at 1 lane. That's it. Rumbled down there, and they said what Ferndale raised were kids. So, but really, they also raised a lot of ferns. So the site I have for you today, and it's not on your page, so you will need to write this in if you want it. But really, you could just go look at, probably, you could Google a thing called livingatlas.arcgis.com/topo explorer/index.html. I looked it up again this morning just to make sure it was still there. Everything is there, and you're just going to have a lot of fun, and it's free. Give that site out to everybody you know. It's free. It's really a great thing to do. But there I was looking at my timeline and saying, wow, is that a neat thing to do or not? It really is. I'm going to pull this over now. Can you all see my screen?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, thank you. You need a file for your timelines. If you looked at mine, first of all, Linda would tell you my total screen is just a mess. It's got lots of things, many places, but I have whole files for paternal and maternal timelines that I've made that I add in. I also have a book, 3-ring binder at my house of great timelines that I've found. I have some that I've pulled up into my computer because I think they're neat, because I don't ever know when I'm going to need those things. Remember that timelines usually have some kind of a theme. If you are talking about your family, then you might be doing a thing called the Lee family timeline or the Long family timeline, or whatever your last name is, or maybe you're working on several families, so you've got it as the Bennett/Lee/Carpenter family timelines, and you're recording everything in there. Well, what would you record? Well, of course, birth, death, important dates. I know that if you looked at my personal timeline, I initially rejected 20 some years ago, I initially rejected putting in the fact that the president, John F. Kennedy, died, and I was the editor of the school paper, and I wrote an article that day. I said, well, I know that, so I didn't put it into my timeline. Well, now I have put it into my timeline, and in fact, I did an entire entry on that date a year ago for my family with my impressions, and then bonus, I found that particular piece of writing that I did. Sounded pretty good for a senior in high school. And I actually reproduced that. And that was kind of a neat thing. Well, we all in our timelines this year, no matter what, even though we don't want to think about it, we should be recording COVID-19 and when something affected our family overall and how long it's gone on. And, you know, mine says I'm tired of it, but we're living with it and we're living in it. Anyway, a lot of different things should be there. I finally, just a few years ago, put in the 911 stuff, the 9/11 stuff. I've put in some other important dates as I've realized just how unique and unusual those are in my life. And so they are things that are important to me, not just births, deaths, marriages, reunions, and so on. Of course, all of the censuses are in there, and any census from 1940 on, what I've done is I've already recorded as residents, not census, but as residents, where people were on that certain date. On April 1 in 1950, for example, I have my tables all made out for my people, so I know where they are. My tables also include their addresses, because that's what I'm going to have to do at midnight.
Good morning, Law Library.
Excuse me? That's what I'm going to have to do if I am going to be able to find that place later on at about midnight or midnight 30 on April 1, because I'll be just like you. I'll be looking for those. I create a timeline for each of my families separately, and I do intertwine some dates. Sometimes when I've had questions about I might even be able to use the individual summary timeline from my Roots Magic family tree. And I've had people say, well, that's all they need. I I'm going to tell you that I believe even with Roots Magic 8, the brand new version that just came out this week,
Yeah.
yes, it's a shortcut. It can help you. It can help you write questions for further research, but you're going to want to add in those local contexts and official county records, because unless it's something that you
Yeah,
have put
yeah.
something here really briefly, my grandpa, Oscar Lee, in his early life, also known as Oscar SQ, and probably when he was first born, known as Oscar Coglizer. And what I've discovered is, I mean, this person that I've thought I've known quite a bit about, when I actually look at my evidence that I have, most of it has been obtained from indirect evidence, not direct evidence. No birth record for him. I'm pretty sure that his grandma was probably the midwife, but no record. He doesn't appear in the 1880 census, although I can tell you he was in that house indirectly. His mom was there, his grandparents were there, his uncle that is 3 months younger, and his playmate is there. He's not there in the 82 census, but I know that he attended his mom's wedding as about a 3-year-old in 1882. The first time that I might be able to find him is 1885, but it says +3. It says William Eskew, Marianne Eskew +3. How do you like that? Those aren't the best apples in the world. So the first time that I really actually find evidence of this man who was born in January of 1879, I finally see his name in Havre in a column in the Great Falls Tribune on May 16, 1903, as living at Mrs. Long's boarding house in Havre in Choteau County. And it's amazing because I've looked at that evidence for years and just said, oh, sure, I've got that, and I've got that, and I've got that. So now I'm really back seeking again more records in Weeping Water, Nebraska, because I know he lived there, or his grandparents did. I know that's where he was for the first 3 years of his life. And I have all kinds of articles about his grandparents. But the only thing I have about him or his mom is the one article that said that his mom got married to William Eskew in May of 1882. And that's evidently when he started using the Eskew name. And there's a really interesting thing about that later on. So I need to go back and look at the appropriate context, because when I label it on the strength of things, my information is kind of weak, other than the fact that I knew him. So I look for appropriate context, as you would, to add. I'm looking for basic info. That's why I've got that thing up at the top that says March 7 of 1855 is when Cass County, Nebraska was created. While Nebraska was still a territory, but no birth registrations began till 1904. What a bummer. What a bummer. So I need to be actually probably going to Weeping Water here on a road trip. Maybe Carolyn and I can make it there. Territory, statehood dates, disaster, bad weather dates, wars, diseases, epidemics, family fires. I mean, the one thing I do know about in Ferndale is my folks had a family fire and everything that they had in their house burned up. They had 4 little kids. I wasn't born yet, but my mom always said, don't save anything from your wedding presents for good. Just use them, because everything was lost in the fire. Sometimes, and you're going to see this again when we look at Linda's timeline in a few minutes, I create my own timelines, but sometimes I cut paste info into my timeline because it gives me the document and the proof right there. You're going to see some nice examples of documenting and proving materials and having them all in one place when you look at Linda's material, which is coming soon. So I can see here that a marriage license was issued yesterday to Oscar L. Eskew and Mary Nanick, both of Havre. And they got married in Great Falls, by the way, here at the Catholic Church and then went back to Havre. I guess that was their wedding trip. I look for consistencies. I employ the fans, the friends and neighbors, collecting friends and neighbors of the target ancestor. I utilize everything I can find. And as I add a question, or if I delete a question, I don't take it out of my list. I keep it there because I want to know later on that I had asked that and that I had answered. And that's why my documents maybe don't look too pretty. But up here, you can see that, for instance, 1882, May 20, his mom married William Eskew. Oscar was never adopted, but he used the Eskew name. Well, I proved that. I actually proved it because he changed his name officially from Eskew to Lee in a court document. So I have that particular document. In 1885, June 18, the family was at Stevens Creek, Lancaster. Was Oscar there? Who was listed? Well, I found out who was listed. William and Mary Ann and +3. And since only 2 other kids had been born, I'm pretty sure Oscar was the 3rd one, but that's all I've got is indirect evidence. So those are the things that I do, but I think it's really important that you create your timeline right away and you make it on, I don't care if you make it on lined paper and write in your information and you insert things. It doesn't have to be typed, but the main thing that I want you to realize is you're making a timeline primarily so you can use it for immediate analysis for who, what, when, where, why, how, and I found a this week about my grandpa, and that's in the 3rd document. Another thing, this is a fan chart, a genealogical fan chart for my grandfather, Oscar L. Eskew Lee. He's the R-U 152 refers to his DNA primary assignment right now that we know about. That's all we know about his father, even though he's supposed to be George Lee. Big lie, big lie. So what it tells me right away when I look at this is, boy, I could fill in his mom's side really well over to the right, but I can't fill in anything on his dad. And that's just a nice little reminder for me. So that tells me a little bit about, and it tells you a little bit about, again, why of timelines and why you do them. Don't say that you'll do it later. You are forgetting valuable facts, and you're forgetting, most important of all with your timeline, you're forgetting what you are doing and ways in which you have analyzed that data. What you say in the moment and what you say when you're looking at those things are extremely important. So record your impressions, record what is going on, because later on, you may have missed the fact that somebody was a relative who actually did a particular thing with this. So now Linda is seated beside me today, and yeah, we're going to move it up. And what Linda has done is Linda's been working on a timeline on the Ann Barry Whitten family timeline. What you're going to see, and what you've got courtesy that I just think is just fantastic, is about 120 years.
It's just 100 years.
Just a little over 100 years of documents regarding her family. And she's done some really valuable things on this document in terms of putting materials down and color coding who the people were that were recorded, that William Whitten and Mary Whitten were her 6th great grandmother and grandfather, and so on down. I'm going to stop talking here in a minute as I ask her some questions about this. But the very first part of this is something that she's done that I think is really wonderful. And that is shown you that, and also something else that I think should be in every timeline. And that is, that's where you also record the name variations that you find as you're looking for these families. Look at how many ways that Whitten was spelled, probably all in one document nearly.
Sometimes in the same paragraph.
Yeah. And all the ways in which the Lowe family were recorded. But you want those right there so that later on, if you don't pick up a document for 6 months, you've got a fast way to look at things as we go on. Now, you'll see that this is a wide document. Over at the left, you'll see the actual date, 17 April 1729, and she's looking in Carolina County, Virginia. Remember, we're not the United States yet, but she is looking in Caroline County, Virginia, Drysdale Parish records, and discovers a will, which this took a lot to discover. William Whitten wrote in his will, he named his children, his 6 youngest children, Thomas, William, Robert, and Jeremiah Whitten, and Mary and Elizabeth Whitten, and then his loving wife, Mary Whitten, that's a nice bonus, his son, George, so that had to be probably the eldest son, and his daughter, Ann Davis, who is apparently has married. He names his wife Mary as executrix. It's witnessed by Farish, Hill, and Burnett, and she gives you a very nice synopsis of the source record where she found this particular thing. Now, that's a nice thing because we're sitting all in one place, people, and we've got a very important factoid that has proven some pretty neat things for her family. First of all, this is in 1729, and by July of a year later, his will is being proved. So sometime during that time, William Whitten died. So we've got a period of time when this person died. And we have his children listed. We have his wife listed. We have who will be the executrix, the witnesses, and so on. So over at the right, you will see that she has also made commentary. The will was abstracted from the genealogies of Virginia families from Tyler's Quarterly Historical Genealogy. So what kind of questions did you have after that, Linda, about this particular thing? I mean, this is a very exciting thing to find the will, and then to also find that the will was proven.
Yeah, well, what it started out as is when we get further down, my fourth great grandfather is Elijah Whitten, and nobody really knows for sure if he belongs to this particular family. So based on a lot of speculation, I decided to see if I could sort it out. And finding this will, which is, even though it's got a citation, it's kind of a circular citation. So we started out with this, and to see if I could get some real documentation rather than family speculation. It's really what it started out as. And I wanted to just put it down where I could quickly look at it and start then seeing if I could find, as I said, documentation. And that's what led to the next thing, where it was proved. And then the next one down, that was one of the first things. The next one down here, this the bound and apprenticed to Robert Farish, which makes me think that that first will, which is just a written document in a genealogy magazine, I still haven't found the original, is probably correct. So again, no particular questions from it. Again, I'm just trying to collect information at this point to see if I can prove that Elijah Whitten, who I know is my my fourth great grandfather, really belongs to this family. Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're all the way to 1760, Valentine's Day, although they probably didn't celebrate it. But this is a land document, Albemarle County deed book.
Yeah. The other thing I needed to try and find is where all these people came from, because if you look at Virginia, and try so I can look for records is again what I'm trying to do. If you noticed in the colors, I kept color coding where they were: Albemarle County, Caroline County, Amherst County. They're scattered all over the place. And the problem is this is one of those cases where they could be in Albemarle County this month, next month they were in Amherst County, but they didn't really move. It was just that the counties kept changing. So you had to figure out where they were, when they were there, when the counties changed, so you know what records to look for. And that was part of trying to chase down all these land records.
So on May 1761, Amherst County was created from part of Albemarle
Yeah.
County. So that's what she's talking about, that it's ironic. They were probably in the same place, in the same location, but because these counties started large and then were cut down and made into other counties, that's something that you have to deal with records. And it made a big difference in her finding these things.
Yeah, yeah, because again, the records stay in the original counties.
So she has noted that particular thing, and I'm just going to make it just a little bigger here so that you can see that on 1 May 1761, Amherst County was created. And so now she's got a couple of places that she can look for records during that time period. She's got both Albemarle, which was a large county, and then Amherst. And it doesn't stop there.
Yeah. And the other thing too, if you notice, I highlighted the Whitten family, but then my direct line is where I did the colors. But Robert Whitten and his wife, Sarah, these land records are also good sometimes for finding spouses and so on, that type of thing.
So we're all the way to 1765. Another 100 pounds for 674 acres. Boy, this family is gaining lots of land. Did they have slaves?
And not at this point that I
Okay.
can tell.
Okay, so we're looking now at the deeds of Amherst County and Albemarle County. And there are books about those things. But probably at some point you're going to have to do a road trip back to Virginia to look at particular things. But this family through the 1760s, late 60s, it looks like they're doing quite a bit of land exchange, land purchase or whatever.
Yeah.
And I want you to keep this in mind. Down here on October 7, 1765, there's a really important little statement right here. Robert Whitten, 263 acres, both sides of Beaver Creek, and Beaver Creek has been spelled many ways
Yeah.
here. It says, okay, and the witness, William Henry, Thomas Reed, and the wife of Whitten consents.
Mm.
Keep that in mind for the next session that we ever have on the 20th of this month, because guess what? Even though it just says wife of Whitten consents, if you can find that document, you will find her signature. And she will have been grilled by the court separately from her husband, because it has to do with certain of her rights that she has.
Yeah, and something I haven't done here because it hasn't been, these are true extracts. The books do exist, and I've looked at some of them. They're very extensive. And this gets into the fan club, because Jan didn't show you, but Stinnett, I think, is in here.
Stand it right here.
He's a brother-in-law of Jeremiah and Robert Whitten. So there's your fan club. He's a brother-in-law. And if you go to the deed itself, you can and get a map. You can lay out where these people are along Beaver Creek and lay everything out, because it's spelled out in extreme detail. I mean, there's pages of writing about where these people are. So you can actually figure out how close they were to each other and so on and so forth. It's quite interesting. I haven't done that because it's not what I'm looking for particularly. Although the fan club is an important clue here to whether or not these people are the right people.
Okay. So we're at this point, we're in 1765, 1768 through 1770.
Yeah.
So we're getting close to within 5 years of this thing eventually called an American Revolution, just trying to give some context here. And they're still buying land. Lines near Whitten's cabin under a mountain.
Yeah, and all I did here is I kept pulling out just anything that referred to Jeremiah Whitten or any of the Whitten family, just to make sure I was keeping track of when they moved, because eventually this family moved from Virginia to Kentucky, and then they ended up in southern Indiana.
So that is very important that you are keeping track of this, because no matter what, you've got land being bought and sold, and every single time land is being purchased or sold, you are going to have documents.
Yeah.
And if you don't have them in one part, consider looking through another part of the records, because if one part of the record, that is the purchaser agreements, are no longer there, maybe whoever purchased it, maybe that document is there.
Well, and the thing is, if they have land, then that means there's probably going to be tax records. And if there's tax records, there might be other records as well in the courts.
Okay, and so it says the wife of Tarrant is mentioned but not named. Again,
Mhm.
keep that in mind for later on, because we may even revisit this document if Linda has been incredibly generous in showing us this. So she's getting down here. She's got 400 acres laid in possession of Jeremiah Whitten near the Tobacco Row Mountains. So you can even identify those in historical maps. And if he reserves use of the new dwelling house and partial use of office houses belonging there to his wife. And then she knows, because of wills and because of indirect information, that Jeremiah Whitten, who is a direct line ancestor, dies sometime between 1773 but before April of 1778. So these are really valuable in terms of giving this. How does she know about this April 1778 date? Well, Ann Whitten, his wife, is mentioned in the minutes of the court order book of Amherst County. Here's another county again, the widow of Jeremiah Whitten. So he's died. She refused to be the administrator. So he was turned over to William Whitten and John and Jeremiah Whitten. All those names being repeated again and again. That's a toughie. But you notice what she's done is she's also given you the context and given herself the context of the original document. They're beautiful because they're so legible.
Yeah, I've been very lucky.
And so there was an inventory and an appraisement of the assessment of the estate of Jeremiah Whitten, and it was returned and recorded in the minutes of the court order book. So tell us about this, Linda.
Oh, the court order book. The problem with that is supposedly there is a will that exists there somewhere, and I haven't found it. And that's one of the clues, or one of the problems, is that supposedly this will names 6 children of Jeremiah and Ann Berry, and it includes William and John and Jeremiah Whitten as children, plus 3 others. I haven't found it, and it doesn't name Elijah. So that's
Elijah should be one of those children, though, right?
Yeah, because he should have been around 7 or 8 years old, and that might be why he wasn't named. So the question mark is he one of their children? And if he was, why wasn't he mentioned? So, but we'll get to that later, because I still think he is, because of other things.
Okay, that you have been able to find.
Yeah.
So notice again that what Linda is doing here for herself is she is carefully putting in the date, the particular source record, and giving herself a pretty good idea of what is there. Of course, she also has, wherever she's been able to copy it, she also has full documents, but this is for analysis. And so what she's done here is, look, now she might go back 2 years later and have another thought again and say, I should have checked thus and such.
Yeah. And just so you can see, that's why I put like here,
that they are believed to be
because
her sons.
I haven't seen, I mean, it's logical, but I haven't seen the will, which supposedly names them as sons, but that would be logical based on how things were done in those days. But
so how many wills did you have to read to get to this one?
a few, mostly the court order books. And if you folks haven't done that, it's quite interesting.
They're worth it. They're not all going to be indexed. We will warn you about that. And so it's kind of tough sometimes to go through this. I'm sure that some of you have done this work. You notice that in July 1779, she's noted as Ann Whitten, spelled again differently, mentioned in the will of John Berry, Culpeper County, Virginia. The will names his wife Jemima includes the children, proving that Ann Witten is his daughter. So she
Yep.
just went, Linda went back another generation on Ann's dad's side and mom's side and got some more information, and another place to begin to look for information. Again, the mixed probate records. These were Family History Library digital films, thank goodness, so that she could look at them, even though that's tough.
Yeah.
And you'll see that it's tough. And of course, there was an inventory because John Barry died what we call testate. That is, he died with a will. If he died without a will, it would be intestate.
Yeah.
And there still might be an inventory.
Yeah, and this one was interesting. This was the slave owning family. Yeah.
So they had what? Wow, they had 14 slaves.
Yeah.
And the entire estate was appraised for 14,000 pounds.
Mhm.
Wow. They had some particular things there. So it's quite likely that there are things in other parts of the record, but of course she was looking in one will record at the time. And what I'm saying is there might be other records recorded in different court documents because they would be separated. So then there's a sale of his estate recorded on June 19 of 1780. And this is pretty interesting. Culpeper County purchased a quart bottle and purchased a horse and one Negro. By 1782, John and William Witten are listed in the Amherst County, Virginia tax list, remember, and she's showing you here what they were taxed on.
And with William Witten being taxed on one Negro, the cattle and the horses, it presumes that Ann is living with William at that time because she's not on the tax list separately. And then in 83, she's listed separately with, and again, she's inserted under Jeremiah and with one slave. So that, like I said, you can sort of see how the people are living. But apparently she's living apart at that point, or she's being taxed separately for some reason. It's just an interesting way to follow the family. Shandy,
Valuable.
I don't know if you want to keep going through this in detail.
Let's just show you some of the other things that she's found.
But let's see, this is the one thing though here. Suddenly here we've got Elijah Witten showing up as a white male over 16. And this is critical because a few steps down and he's on the tax list on June 2nd, along with Ann Witten down at the bottom on June 2nd with two other people at different times. And to be on that, he has to be 16. And it gives me a new birth date for him. And that's, like I said, he's quite young then when I presume to be his father. And he was probably living with Ann at the time. And to me, that's a pretty good clue. I think that it's probably, he's living with his mother, probably. And he's just turned 16 because he doesn't show up anywhere else. And that's a poll tax is what it is, a head tax at that time.
So we see either a move to Kentucky or
No, they're still in Amherst County.
okay. But in May of 1791, Ann Witten, who is the daughter of Ann Witten,
Yeah, by then they've moved, yeah.
they're in Lincoln County, Kentucky. But please remember, early on, the area that is called Kentucky was Virginia. And so you really need to look carefully at maps to see what it is that you're looking at and how those things are separated out.
1790s when.
Because now you've got a Revolutionary War widow pension file. Isn't that cool? Managed to find it right out at fold 3. Anyway, as we begin to go through this particular thing, you can see compiled service records here. Then a consent form for Elizabeth Lowe to marry Elijah Witten. No actual date of marriage has been found, but you've got a consent form, so that's something else again. And another way to begin to look at marriages. There really are probably about 15 to 20 different ways especially in America, that marriages were recorded or informally recorded. So we're all the way to 1796 at this point. This may certify that you are to grant a license for Elijah Whitten and my daughter Elizabeth Lowe to get married together,
Given under my hand.
given under my hand and sealed this 21st day of May, 1796. And it was just that way. That's a pretty neat piece of proof to find. And Elijah Whitten then appears in Washington County, Kentucky tax lists. And he's the only male over 21 not taxed for any personal property. So you can see what you can begin to do with a particular piece of information like this as you begin to piece that together, and maybe eventually Linda will find things even earlier in some of those early Virginia counties and be able to add things in. But right now, in terms of her being able to actually put Elijah Whitten with a known family, this is what she's been doing, and the tough record she has had to read just to be able to get to those facts. What else would you like to?
That's amazing. But the main thing about it, like I said, it puts all this information in one spot that I can grab quickly and try and figure out where else I have to go to look for information. Because like, for example, don't have a marriage information for Jeremiah Whitten and Ann Berry, but with all those counties, now I know where to look, because I know all the different places they may have gotten married, because we know where her father died, things like that. And it's in one spot instead of looking at a dozen different places. That's the value of putting it all in one place.
I'm going to show one more thing really quickly so that you can see what my latest trauma is, because we all have them with new questions to ponder. This is what I discovered this week. I had no idea that Oscar Eskew Lee, whatever you want to call him, had ever been in the Army in any way. I mean, I could see that when he came to Havre, Montana in about 1902 or so, that he joined every organization he could, trying to get a sense of belonging, I believe, because he evidently, at that point, he was 21, maybe 22 years old, and he had evidently been on his own probably since somewhere between the time he was 10 and 13. He left the home. He had an abusive stepfather, and he left that home, went to Havre, later brought his mom and his half brothers and sisters there. But he joined a thing called the Montana National Guard. I just found this document out at Ancestry the other day. By the way, it actually came from the Montana Memory Project. I went out and looked at the Montana Memory Project, and it's a little sketchy to look at this stuff because it does all of its index in one. So you'll roll past a bunch of these cards, and then you'll finally get to a C, and then you'll roll past another part of their index, and you'll finally get to a D, and so on. But it says he enlisted at Havre on August 24, 1911. And he was a farmer. He had 3 kids by then. He was discharged on April 8, 1913 by reason of mustering out of the company. It was funny because one of my first questions was, okay, can I find any records? He joined, it looks like he joined. Did he attend 10 days of summer camp training at Fort Harrison in July 1912? I mean, I can tell you they got paid $1.50 a day, so it would have been important to him. But now I've got to see if I can find the muster papers. And why, Linda, was his character judged excellent?
Because he didn't get into any trouble.
That's what the military expert says. He got judged excellent because he didn't get into any trouble. What's interesting is he has a World War I and a World War II old man draft record. This is never mentioned. My siblings know nothing about this. I've been looking for things. I found the military boys coming home in a Great Falls Tribune record on July 26, 1912. Company C, 2nd Infantry, returned this morning. but they didn't list the guys, doggone it. So I'll have to go down to Helena to see if I can find that. But I did find a book, found a book called Splendid Service, the Montana National Guard, and it nicely treats it for about 40 pages, but it never names the people, doggone it. Anyway, but there is a book, so I can at least read a little bit of the background of what happened. So that's my latest dilemma. This is my latest thing that I've put into his timeline for his life, and it's weird. I'll keep you posted. So how many of you are doing timelines? Do you do timelines? Dorothy, I know, does. Bonnie has. Bonnie, you've done some timelines. Gary does. Gary has tried some, I know. Larry, we're gonna help into a timeline here real soon because I told him I would help him. I just find them tremendously useful as an analysis tool because then you're not switching back and forth, going back to mock documents. You're not going back to Roots Magic 7 or Roots Magic 8 to look at your materials. You've got everything in front of you. And I think I've told you before, I've taken just a timeline of everything that I knew about my family when I went to a foreign country. And it was just, the 40 pages I needed, not documents that I was waving in the air saying, I wonder if I can prove this particular thing. My documents, just as with Linda's, always involve specific dates or a time frame. They include the fact that I'm trying to prove when, for example, Lake County, Montana became a county in 1923, because right now I know for Ferndale, I have to look, I could look all the way to at least Spokane County in Spokane, Washington, because guess what? Ferndale was part of it at one point, looking back to see who settled there, whatever, and so on. So it's rather important for me to be able to identify that as a Montana territory, I had to look at, or I have to look at Missoula County for records. I have to look at Flathead County for records. I have to look at Lake County for records when I'm concerning those things. So to me, being able to look at the context, that is place, is really important and one of the most important things that you put into the timeline that you are doing. Questions?